All right, imagine this for a second. You sue an entire country, and they just don't even bother to show up. Well, that's exactly what happened when Germany and Iceland clashed over fishing rights in this huge showdown at the highest court in the world. Today, we're diving into the story of the Fisheries jurisdiction case.
This really gets to the heart of the whole drama, doesn't it? Germany drags Iceland to the world's highest court. But Iceland? Well, Iceland refuses to even send a lawyer. It's a bold move, and it pushes the very limits of international law. It makes you ask, can justice really be served when one side just leaves an empty chair in the courtroom? So here's how we're going to break this whole story down. First, the fight over the fish itself. Then we'll look at a critical agreement from 1961. We'll get into the drama of that empty chair in court, see how the court tried to keep the peace, and then analyze the final judgment. And of course, we'll wrap up with why this case from the 70s is still so important today. Okay, so our story kicks off in the choppy waters of the North Atlantic, back in the early 1970s. A conflict is brewing, but it wasn't over oil or land. Nope, it was over fish, a resource so vital it would push two nations right to the brink. And right here, you can see the fundamental problem. For Iceland, fishing wasn't just an industry, it was the lifeblood of its entire economy. They called it a one-source economy. But for Germany, it was all about protecting a fishing tradition that went back generations, not to mention the thousands of jobs that depended on it. So this was never just a simple disagreement. It was survival versus history. And this was the move that lit the fuse. Iceland just up and announced it was expanding its exclusive fishing zone from 12 to 50 nautical miles, all by itself. So overnight, waters where German ships had fished for decades were suddenly off limits. Germany, of course, called it a violation of international law, and just like that, the stage was set for a massive legal battle. Now, Germany didn't just storm into court with a general complaint. No, they came prepared. They were armed with a very specific document from 1961, an agreement they believed was their legal smoking gun. And there it is. This is the core of Germany's whole case. This one sentence from that 1961 agreement seems crystal clear, right? It's a promise, down in black and white. If Iceland ever extended its fishing zone and Germany had a problem with it, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, would be the one to settle things. This little legal tool has a name. It's called a compromissory clause. You can kind of think of it like a prenuptial agreement, but for countries signing a treaty. Both sides agree way in advance how they're going to handle a big fight down the road. It's designed to prevent exactly what was happening here, one country trying to bail on a legal settlement. And this is where the story takes a really shocking turn. Armed with what seemed like a totally airtight legal case, Germany kicked off the proceedings. But when the court date finally came around, Iceland was a no-show. So what was Iceland's reasoning? Well, they basically said the world had changed too much. They argued that the 1961 deal was made for a different era. Now, with what they called the ever-increasing exploitation of fish stocks because of modern tech, that old agreement was just obsolete. In their eyes, national survival was way more important than an old treaty. And because of that, the court had no business hearing the case at all. But here's the thing. Despite Iceland's absence, the wheels of justice just kept turning. Germany filed the case, Iceland formally said, nope, we're not coming, and the court held hearings anyway. And in the end, with a near-unanimous 14-1 decision, the judges declared that yes, based on that 1961 agreement, they absolutely had the authority to rule on this. So you might be asking, why didn't the whole case just fall apart? The answer is hiding in the court's own rulebook. Article 53 is designed for this exact scenario. It legally requires the judges to keep going. They have to first prove to themselves that they have jurisdiction, and then they have to rule on the case, with or without the other country's cooperation. That empty chair just couldn't stop the process. Now, while all the main legal arguments were being put together, things in the North Atlantic were getting pretty tense. So to stop a full-blown conflict from breaking out on the water, the court had to step in and act like a referee. And the way the court did this was by issuing something called interim measures. You can think of them as temporary restraining orders. They are legally binding commands meant to freeze the situation and make sure neither side does anything to permanently mess with the other's rights while the case is still going on. The court's solution was actually a pretty careful balancing act. It told Iceland, you can't enforce your new 50-mile rule against German ships for now. But at the same time, it told Germany, you can't just fish as much as you want. You have to cap your annual catch. And to both of them, the message was loud and clear. Do not make this conflict any worse.
So, after more than 2 years of legal proceedings, with Iceland absent that entire time, the court was finally ready. On July 25, 1974, it delivered its final verdict on the core issues of the case. The court's final decision was actually pretty nuanced. It had 4 key parts. First, it said Iceland's 50-mile zone was not enforceable against Germany. Second, that meant Iceland couldn't just kick out German fishing boats on its own. But, and this is so important, the court didn't just give Germany a total win. It also ordered both countries to sit down and negotiate a new agreement. And that new deal had to balance Iceland's special dependence on fishing with Germany's long-established rights. That word, opposable, is the key legal term here. All it means is enforceable against. So the court was saying that while Iceland could declare a 50-mile zone if it wanted, it had zero legal power to enforce it against Germany, specifically because of that 1961 treaty they both signed. The promise they made trumped the unilateral action they took. And there was one final loose end to tie up: compensation. See, Germany had asked for damages, claiming its ships were being harassed by Icelandic patrol boats. The court looked at the claim, but in the end, they just didn't think there was enough evidence to justify awarding any money, and that closed that chapter of the case. So why are we talking about a fishing dispute from 50 years ago? Well, because this case established legal principles that are absolutely fundamental to how countries deal with each other even today. Honestly, this case was a huge landmark for international law. It sent a powerful message that treaties aren't just disposable conveniences you can toss aside. It proved that the World Court can and will make a ruling, even when staring at an empty chair. And maybe most importantly, it created a blueprint for how to solve modern resource disputes, a balanced approach that puts the duty to negotiate in good faith right at the heart of the solution. And that verdict leaves us with this really profound question, one that's more relevant now than ever. The court provided a legal answer, sure, but that fundamental conflict is still there. In a world where resources, fish, water, energy, are only getting scarcer, how do we find that perfect balance between respecting historical rights and addressing the urgent, existential needs of a nation trying to survive? That's the challenge this case leaves for all of us.